Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and at long last, Dragon's Dogma 2 is set to release within the next few hours of my recording this video, and for RPG fans, this is a highly anticipated title after not seeing a new game in the series for nearly 10 years. There was the original Dragon's Dogma that released in 2012, and then we saw Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen 1 year later, which included all of the content from the original game, plus all of the DLC for Dragon's Dogma, along with Bitter Black Island and a large number of bug fixes. 2 years after that, we saw the MMO Dragon's Dogma Online, which never really caught on, and because of that, the servers were shut down a mere 4 years later in 2019. But Dragon's Dogma 2 is here, or will be in a few hours, and is looking to be a very promising successor to the first game released 12 years ago. Well, promising in many ways at least. You see, a short while ago, information started coming out that Dragon's Dogma 2, at least on PC, has a few problems. Now, after reviewing the information, this may not be too impactful, but the quest for better frame rates has caused some rather innovative and hilarious ideas. First off, let's take a look at PC Gamer's performance analysis to get a better understanding of what might be going on. At 1080p with max settings, ray tracing off in interlace mode, in the open world test area, a Core i7-9700K with an RTX 4070 Ti seems to be the minimum hardware required to maintain 60 frames per second. And when switching to the Venworth City test area, it requires an i7-14700KF with the same video card to maintain a higher than 60 FPS average. This tells us that something within the game is causing some performance impact directly tied to the CPU, resulting in some bottlenecking. And according to Capcom, that's exactly what is going on. In a statement to IGN, quote, "In Dragon's Dogma 2, a large amount of CPU usage is allocated to each character and dynamically calculates the impact of their physical presence in various environments. In certain situations where numerous characters appear simultaneously, the CPU usage can be very high and may affect the frame rate. We are aware that in such situations, settings that reduce GPU load may currently have a limited effect. However, we are looking into ways to improve performance in the future." And by characters there, they mean NPCs. Now you can imagine that for hardware like the Steam Deck, where some people have reported less than 10 frames per second, this might be a bit of an issue. This image from Touch Arcade shows the game running at just 14 frames per second on the Steam Deck, where they said, "Without changing any settings, the game barely ran above 10 FPS in the open world after the intro scenes. The title screen that has an in-engine scene playing behind the logo was also hovering around 20 frames per second. When setting everything to low or off and FSR on ultra performance, I got at most 15 frames per second in the open world. This is before even getting into combat. Manually forcing the GPU clock to 1600 resulted in about 18 frames per second in one part, but it really hovers around 10 FPS in the current build, which isn't remotely close to what I consider playable. I even tried forcing the game to a lower resolution from the Steam Deck settings, but it didn't help in-game. I do not recommend playing Dragon's Dogma 2 on Steam Deck if the build on launch day is like the one I have a few days prior to launch." So put simply, the game's optimization on PC is not the greatest, and for the Steam Deck it is for all intents and purposes unplayable as of a few days before launch. But people on the Dragon's Dogma subreddit had some very entertaining ideas on how to resolve the issue with CPU bottlenecking in the game. From the user Capcom, "Since the way NPCs are handled is theorized to be very taxing on your CPU, killing off NPCs should boost your performance. However, what's the point of killing off NPCs to boost your frame rate if you're also killing content? This is why I'm suggesting a community sources list of junk NPCs we are free to murder." To which people have responded with comments such as, "For starters, I guess any non-shopkeeper NPC can definitely go. Maybe you can keep your beloved. Guards can go too. Who are they going to protect after we're done optimizing the game?" Exactly. If we're aiming for the best performance, then can't optimize just the men, but the women and the children too.
"I killed them all. They're dead. Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children too."
Which was met with responses like, Giga Chad Kazuma gender equality moment, these hands are rated E for everyone, and time to optimize the masses, or execute FPS 66. And while the memes continue to flow from there, it does bring up one point that was made by Capcom not too long ago, where per a Capcom interview over at Automaton Media, Capcom have confirmed that NPCs in the game are indeed subject to permadeath. In that interview, they said, "Our basic premise since the start of the series has been creating a fantasy world simulator, so NPCs dying is a normal occurrence. If there's an NPC you care for in a town, you will need to protect them as you fight or hold them and run. However, there are wake stones, resurrection items, so even if an NPC dies, all is not lost. It's just that, for a simulator, it's unnatural to have beings that are completely invincible. When there is death, we take it seriously and it affects how we act. In a world without death, I think people would be irresponsible and apathetic to their own actions. Death makes us feel a sense of danger. Dragon's Dogma 2 contains many aspects that leverage this tense relationship with death. For example, you come across a cliff. You could make a shortcut by leaping down, but you cannot be sure if you will die or not. You can choose to take the risk or to avoid it. In this way, the height of the cliff becomes meaningful to the player, which is all well and good, but my own response to what the developers said there is yes, in a world without death, people would be irresponsible and apathetic to their own actions. But also at the same time, in a game with low FPS, that game's world is about to get a whole lot emptier for a lot of people. And for a lot of them, I can easily see a resurgence of the Prime Day memes that were so prevalent back in the day, with Dragon's Dogma NPC saying, "I died for your FPS."
Remember, I died for your sins.
Now, in all honesty, should you have to kill off your NPCs just to make the game more playable? No, of course not. Will it be hilarious to see? Oh, absolutely, without question. And from the looks of it, on PC, Dragon's Dogma is nowhere near unplayable, unlike our poor Steam Deck users out there, so I don't think it entirely necessary to avoid this game at launch. Well, that is, unless you want to play it on your Steam Deck. If that's the case, then you should absolutely avoid purchasing this game until it is sufficiently patched. And in terms of the buggy and all but unplayable at-launch AAA releases that we've seen these past few years, Dragon's Dogma 2 is a relatively minor case in that regard, where it will be playable for the majority of PC gamers, and it's about to get a lot more playable for several people very quickly. But regardless, it is true that a ton of people are excited for this game, and I am too, truth be told. That's part of the reason why I'm making this video. Yes, the game is launching with a bit of a rough patch in terms of FPS, but it is not in any way unplayable, and the simple fact that people are murder hoboing their ways to better frame rates is just delicious to me. So, if you happen to find yourself performing a little mass optimization, I think we'll all probably understand. After all, it's never a bad thing to seek out the best frame rates possible. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll optimize you next time.